No worries.
That's good.
All right. We got the live playing the intro. So you give me a 3, 2, 1 when we're on here. All right. Breaker. Hello. Check. Yes, we are live. Breaking news. What's up, everybody? This is Eli, your host tonight. Welcome to the Heady, Vermont live stream. As always, we are hosted here in the beautiful Jam Creative Studios here in Burlington, Vermont. We've got a special guest with us tonight, Mr. Nick Karabelas. We are going to be talking with Nick about a whole lot of things tonight. Before we do, we want to give some shout-outs, do a little news recap. As always, thank Mr. Shawn Cimonetti, always ready, behind the decks tonight. This beautiful production, we got multiple cameras, we got mics, I got a CIA earpiece in here. We got a plant. Yeah, we got to give Colin Garvey a co-production credit tonight for set design. Coming through with all this. So thank you guys for tuning in tonight. We're going to talk about medical marijuana quite a bit. So if you are a patient, if you're a caregiver, you know patients, you know caregivers, tell your friends, tell your mom, tell your mom's friends. It's a good time to tune in, and we are, as always, going to try to answer some questions. So we know we've got a lot of patients who are out there following us on Facebook. As always, drop your comments, drop your questions in here, and we will get to them.
Awesome.
So we kind of did the introduction, Nick. I wanted to start with a little 420 review. We did a lot of stuff on
you guys had a busy 420.
Busy 420. We did some trivia. We did a networking event down at Skinny Pancake in Montpelier. We did the Super Troopers 2 premiere, which, have you gotten a chance to see it yet?
I have not.
Okay, well, I can highly recommend it. I can say everybody who was there, we sold it out. I'm sorry to everybody who was messaging, texting, day of. We try to tell you guys in advance. This stuff does sell out.
There was one. I saw it.
Yeah, I'm a procrastinator too, so I'm sorry if you did not get a chance to go, but it was hilarious. Like, not only did we have a great time at the screening, pretty friendly crowd, pretty mellowed out bunch. Big thank you to Mansfield Provisions for stepping up and sponsoring.
Hi to Kyle.
We had some swag bags. Kyle, Drew was there dressed up as a Super Trooper.
Beautiful.
Which was awesome. He had the full stash and everything. So
awesome.
That was we had Skinny Pancake brunch on Saturday morning. That was very cool. Papa's Porch played some tunes. And then Saturday we did the Hickory Glass event. That was excellent. His stuff is insane.
Yep.
The Heady Vermont IG story, it's still on there. Instagram people who are watching right now. I encourage you to check all this stuff out. We put it up. We'll put more out there. Hope you guys had a good 420.
Yeah.
Did you do anything special on 420?
Stayed safe.
Yeah. Good.
Had a good time. I mean, it's 420 every day.
It was funny because that was one of the things we were talking about, and I guess this would be a good time before we get into this, because you and I are just going to talk as the friends we are.
Yeah.
So let's give the folks at home a little bit more of an introduction to know who you are.
Sure.
Nick Karabelas. I met you, I think, almost a decade ago at this point.
Yeah, probably was.
When you were the owner and running and everything else at Bierhaus. So maybe give the folks a little bit about your background as kind of the conventional sense.
Yep.
And then we'll talk about some cannabis stuff too.
Absolutely. So Eli is correct. Probably about 10 years ago, we first met, and it was at Bierhaus. It was a German restaurant that I opened here in Burlington on Lower Church Street. It was sort of a combination of all the things that I loved living in Europe. I was really lucky. I got to go to high school in Switzerland.
Okay.
And while I was there, it was very fortuitous and through happenstance, as we're discussing and defining what is hemp. Hemp in Switzerland at that time was defined by its end usage, not by any THC content, not anything other than the end usage.
Really?
So what happened was, in this not little, I mean, it's the third biggest city in Switzerland, but there were more, day one, there was one shop that opened, and they were selling them as smelling bags, incense, pillows.
Okay.
And fast forward, and the next store opens, and the next store opens, and by the time I was a senior in high school, there were more cannabis shops in Basel than there were bakeries.
Really?
So if you can imagine that.
And nobody thinks about Switzerland as being like a cannabis destination, right? You think about Amsterdam.
Amsterdam is the first thing everybody goes to.
Right.
But in fact, all of the breeders in Amsterdam, because of the cultivation restrictions that are in place there, because Switzerland, the way they were interpreting the law at the time, everybody from Amsterdam moved to Switzerland and started doing large-scale growing. So I got exposed to a legal market at kind of an early age, and was able to see, it was normalized. It wasn't condemned. You saw people. I mean, I was in high school, and we would go. It'd be lunch, and we'd be sitting outside by the Tingley Fountain, and there'd be bankers smoking huge spliffs at the middle of the day, and it wasn't a big deal. This is Europe. People still smoked cigarettes at the time.
Yes.
People would drink beer.
Cigarettes still existed at the time, yes.
It was crazy. And it was something that I feel like incredibly fortunate to have been exposed to. And I'm also lucky because God knows what kind of trouble I would have gotten into had I been a student in high school here.
Right.
So I could avoid all of that.
Well, it's an interesting introduction. Like you said, most people's first exposure to cannabis is in high school, but it's not high school in Switzerland. Right. And so it's funny how this must have shaped. But your next business venture was not necessarily, at least the ones we're going to talk about, where was in beer, right?
It was in beer. And that was another part. When you moved to Switzerland and you're 15 years old and you're there for 5 years,
mm-hmm.
4 years, and you come of age. It's you can walk into a bar and they'll serve you a beer. So that was sort of, I was coming to Burlington at the time. I was going to school at Bates and was coming to visit a friend up in Burlington. And now as a registered medical patient, I'll confess at the time I was coming to see him because Vermont has always had some of the best cannabis on the market. If you can find it, craft and local and
mm-hmm.
So I was driving to come up to see him and fell in love basically with Vermont the minute I looked out the window. It was the first time I felt like I was home since I left Switzerland. So I kind of put a peg in it. And
the modern day Von Trapp family. As I'm sitting here drinking Trapp, we're drinking Von Trapp Pilsner. And you were kind of doing your version of the
And that was how it came about. I fell in love with Burlington, and I knew what I wanted to do. And at the time, there was no farmhouse. There were dives.
Well, and it was an interesting time, like you said. Like in Burlington, it was kind of like this transitional period where more of kind of the tap rooms were coming on board, a lot more just consciousness about kind of where beer came from, and also probably a lot of people, kind of focusing more on Vermont beer, and you were doing something trying to bring that experience here.
And that was kind of the crazy thing too. My notion was that Vermont is a beer state, not necessarily just a Vermont beer state.
Right.
And it was a lot of work to get the brands in. And when we came in, there was Beck's, I think, was like the only beer on the market. So it was tough at first, but you work with the distributors and let them know, look, there's going to be a market for this.
Well, and this is a good, this is kind of a good natural segue because one thing that I really love about sort of your background and experience and taking that highly regulated industry, right? Talking about beer in Vermont, which we can talk about 3-tier systems. We're not going to get into all of these details and what does and does not suck about regulating, intoxicating substances. But you mentioned, you're a registered patient.
Yes.
Which we'll throw that out here. I said if you want to light up during the interview, you can because legally it's fine.
I may at some point in time get up and do that.
All right, good. So we got that out there. You mentioned that Vermont had this reputation. You were a young person coming to hang out in Burlington. You had some Heady Vermont friends. All lowercase letters, Heady, Vermont.
Yes, Heady, Vermont.
Right. And so how did you kind of get involved as a medical patient? I don't want to get into your total health history. That's not for everybody's information, but you became a registered patient, and when did you start getting familiar with our system here?
So I was under the misconception that I think a lot of people were, that it was impossible to get onto the registry unless you had HIV or end-stage terminal cancer. Having come from this background, obviously where I was consuming, it was decriminalized. I ran a restaurant and I had a bar, so I had to give up the cultivation end of things. I moved from Maine to open the restaurant. That was a sacrifice that I had to make at the time.
Right.
It was really sort of fortuitous. I left sold the Bierhaus, and I'm sorry to everybody. It was much beloved, I know, but somebody wrote me a big fat check, and I walked away. So, and as I was walking away, it turns out years in the kitchen, it's a tough job. You wind up with aches and pains and broken bones, and sometimes you have to cut a cast off to work restaurant.
Being a restaurant, like I've got, like 15, literally half of my life spent working in restaurants. And,
so
everybody who's out there, if you have grown up in Vermont or spent any time here between the ages of 15 and 30, good chance that you've done some hospitality work at some point in time.
Yep.
So I think everybody can probably relate to those kinds of aches and pains, and even just knowing, like, running a restaurant, being a GM, being an owner, having your hands involved in everything. Like, you're washing dishes, you're ordering food, you're cooking food, you're expo.
There are no days off.
All of that, all of that stuff. But like you said, you were able to get out of that.
Yep.
And we should say, for context, you're down in southern Vermont, right?
I'm in the Upper Valley. Yep.
Yeah, you're in the Upper Valley.
Yep.
So for our geographic diversity here, it's not all about Burlington all the time. You're here representing Southern Vermont today as well. So
hopefully I'm doing them justice.
I think it's a great start. So, patient, cultivation background.
Background, and then stepping out of the restaurant, I looked into, I'm also happened to have developed later in life an allergy to Tylenol. Yeah, fatal. So it took me a couple times in the hospital to figure this out. So my options for pain relief were relatively limited, and I knew from personal experience that cannabis helped. Looking at the rules, looking at the law, I said I don't want to be, I would rather be considered a patient, because that's how I believe that I'm using this substance, than to be considered a criminal. So I had the conversation with my doctor. At the time, she hadn't written too many. She went through the history, and she saw, well, you broke your bone, and obviously we had the conversation about you not cutting your cast off to work saute for restaurant week, and it was pretty clear that yes, the chronic pain condition exists, and from her standpoint, it's important to know that your care providers, they're not giving you a prescription, they're not writing you an endorsement. What they're doing is they're certifying a condition.
This is one of the...
is another big misconception. And it can lead to issues with physicians who are uncomfortable because it puts it in the patient's hands to a large degree. We have 5 dispensaries now here in Vermont that patients can choose from. There have been various opinions on product and prices, and I think it's fair to say that the reality is the gray market provides an equal quality product at a much lower price. And it's just one of those things that we're dealing with.
I just listened to a great podcast last night from Shango Los called Catching Fire, and the whole episode is about kind of what regulators get wrong by discounting the existing gray market. And not actually incorporating not only the supply that's out there, but the talent and the skill that's out there too. And I know that's a lot of why we're so involved, and you especially as a patient, who knows how to grow his own, and has been out there and knows what patients are going through. It's a totally valid point to bring up here. This is also not a sponsored, this is our own independent live stream here too. So
right, absolutely.
You're here representing Greener Mountain Consulting. You can let it rip if you want. But the greater point, I think, being that, I don't think anybody would say that the Vermont medical program is where it should be, where we want it to be. Right?
Where we hope to bring it.
Right, where we hope to bring it. And I think that, you've been involved as a patient, and now, with Greener Mountain Consulting, doing this and helping patients go through this process. It's evolving, and you see what happens with some structural things and how those factors affect things later when you want to change the rules and open it up. And we'll talk in a little bit about kind of what legalization might mean for this too. But let's talk a little bit about Greener Mountain Consulting, because I want to give people a little bit more sort of context on what this business is, and how you, as somebody who is a patient, who knows this system, who has had these conversations with presumably quite a few medical professionals at this point. What kind of questions do people ask you? Maybe just start with what Greener Mountain Consulting is doing now and how you work with medical patients.
So Greener Mountain Consulting currently, and up until July 1st, works with patients and getting patients registered into the Vermont Marijuana Registry. So I don't connect doctors directly to patients. That's a bottleneck that was almost solved for a period of time.
The state didn't really appreciate CannaCare docs.
Yeah, CannaCare docs didn't
advertising their services, which was pretty unfortunate.
Yeah, I think that was for me. It was frustrating as somebody who doesn't solve that bottleneck to be able to have them in the state as a group that I could say, hey, this is who you go and see, and they will do their due diligence, and it's on them.
Because that's the number one question still, right? How do I get a card?
How do I get a card?
How do I get a card? How do I get a card? How do I get a card?
And so many people are so reluctant to even mention the concept with their care provider because of fear that they're going to get a mark in their medical history, or that there's going to be some sort of backlash to it. And really, in my experience and what I've seen, and I've seen a fair amount, for the most part, there are instances where I have been surprised at the response from the medical community. But for the most part, what we're seeing is a very receptive group of people who are looking to have cannabis as now that first rung in the pain care ladder. We have an opioid problem here in Vermont.
Pain care ladder, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because that's a term that I've heard Jesse Lynn, among other people, talk about, and sort of how it's becoming more understood. And I think CBD probably is helping a lot of medical professionals open their mind. So, I mean, are you kind of seeing, how's that evolving when you're talking with doctors? Because you do talk to doctors. I know that's not the primary focus of what you're doing. Right? But how have you seen sort of attitudes evolve? And are you hearing from doctors who are seeking you out and saying, hey,
I can give you the best example I can give you.
Yeah.
When I said that I was lucky enough to go to high school in Switzerland, it was because my father was a part of Big Pharma. And I know that they get the bad name in Big Pharma, and it's kind of been a process dealing with what I believe to be a better remedy than some of the other available options. I just lost my course.
It's an interesting, well, I mean, you're talking about your father's background in Big Pharma and how that informed your understanding of how medical people think about this.
So, yeah, that was the other piece of it. That there had been a lot of, it was always that they couldn't control, the studies hadn't been done. In the United States for the last however many years we've been studying it, you could only get approval to study it if it was to show harm.
Right.
So for, however many years that was, all of the studies that were done that were trying to prove that there was going to be harm, all we were seeing was that there was no harm. There weren't a lot of studies being done to show efficacy and benefits to, and that's where I think that doctors amongst themselves have always kind of known, as there are therapists amongst themselves. I don't know if anybody is familiar with the group is called MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. They've been doing a lot of work with MDMA and PTSD. So there is a lot of this our drugs versus your drugs that goes on. Tying it back into the physicians are aware. They are starting to look at things differently. They're using ketamine now to treat depression. If you go to Massachusetts, there are huge clinics for this. I think that physicians and care providers are opening their minds a little bit more. Previously, where the response to pain, the expectation was to eliminate pain.
Right.
And I think where they lie now is trying to get the message across to patients that the expectation is that there is to reduce the pain. That you're going to deal with some amount of pain, but that opiates shouldn't be the second rung on this pain care ladder. And that's where cannabis comes in.
Yeah. Well, and seeing kind of how that's changed, and a lot of it, ironically, has been from opiates and all the awful shit that's happened and all the terrible consequences that we've seen. I think people have said, man, it really couldn't be worse, than this. And I think, unfortunately, that's probably driven a fair amount of it, too. Most people I find who are involved in this, working with patients, are patients themselves. They've had some pretty powerful, formative sort of moments. Sort of what helped you figure out that this was something that you were going to be able to do full time, or that you wanted to kind of do full time, and sort of what what needs you saw, and
It was seeing other people, having run the restaurant. There was that, like as we touched on, the opiate issue. In restaurants, it's a problem, and it was something that came and went in every kitchen, and it was one of those things that was just kind of heartbreaking to see. So coming from the position of seeing people struggle with an addiction, knowing that cannabis might provide a potential, allow them to decrease the usage of the opiates.
Yeah.
It was really tough to see, and I think that was a piece of it, and that was sort of my moment. That between that and not wanting to be considered a criminal. But,
right.
Look, I'm a taxpayer. I run a business.
Well, and if you work so hard to set up such a highly regulated business, you're like, man, I really don't need to fuck around too much.
That's the other thing.
Right.
I didn't want to break the rules.
Right.
And it turned out that there was this misconception that you had to be in, essentially end stage care to become a patient. And it looked to me black and white. No, if you take Advil for something on a regular basis, it's the same injury, you're eligible for medical cannabis in the state of Vermont. Whether or not your doctor is willing to certify your condition, that's another matter. And that's sort of where the consulting comes in, and where the physician education comes in.
Right. And so, are you talking more to prospective patients about, this is part of it, right? Letting people know that, hey, you have chronic pain, you qualify.
You are eligible.
It doesn't matter what your chronic pain is from.
Yep.
Like you said, that kind of pain maintenance proposition, right?
Yep.
How much of it is patients and how much of it is, is physicians and medical professionals? Because like you said, that's the misconception. And Dr. Joe McSherry, I've talked to him and interviewed him, and people still understanding that you're not recommending, you're not prescribing, you're not validating. You're saying that this person is my patient, yes, and this person has a condition which
is on the list.
The legislature has deemed appropriate.
Yep.
Right? None of these things have to do with any medical efficacy at all.
Right.
It
should be as simple as checking those two boxes.
Right.
And I think sometimes people get, a prospective patient will work themselves up and be a little nervous. And I think the doctors may be,
How do you coach people? Like, I know my mom, I make this personal. My mom went and asked, her physician, and did not have a great experience.
Really?
And so, how much of your coaching, what kind of things are you coaching people about before they go and talk to their doctor? And like you said, getting over that, hey, they're not going to judge you.
The conversation, the talk with your doc, we call it.
The talk before the talk.
Talk before the talk.
Yeah.
So ultimately, you're working with, if this is somebody, and all circumstances vary. Is this a new doctor that somebody is seeing for the first time, or is this somebody's long-term general practitioner? Is it the family doctor? All circumstances vary, and you sort of have to base each approach on the individual circumstance. So I have been contacted by patients who have said that I have brought it up to my physician, and my physician is staunchly opposed and will not sign the piece of paper that certifies my condition. And I said, but you have the medical documentation that says you have the condition. And they, here it is. And okay, well, if I'm in your shoes, I would be considering finding a new doctor. Ultimately, if it's a part of what you deem important for your care, and I think that's what it comes down to. There's this, it's not doctor shopping, that's sort of a term that has been developed, that discourages people.
It makes it sound like it's a bad thing, right?
You're trying to find a good fit with the person who is going to be taking care of your welfare for hopefully a long period of time.
Right.
I also tell my clients, there's two people you should never lie to. You should never lie to your doctor, and you should never lie to your lawyer.
Right.
These are two people that you are paying good money to coach you.
The only way you're going to get the value of that information is if you are being
full
honest.
Disclosure.
That's right.
Absolutely.
That's right. That makes total sense.
That's been a huge part of it. And I've seen even in the last handful of years, things change. I'm fortunate enough that one of my groomsmen, shout out to Jay, is a physician, and he works with a number of other physicians, as they tend to do.
Yeah.
And they are sort of, I don't know if anybody's seen Scrubs, but like they tend to hang together. It's actually much like watching this. So I happened to be there on a Friday night. I guess it was the night that all of the people from the office got together and had a couple of beers. And so I got to be a fly on the wall in the room where the conversation was happening about cannabis and about what are the current views.
Interesting. How many of us would love to hear that conversation, especially when people are a little loose too?
A couple of beers in them.
Get these doctors a couple.
And a couple of them were, I think, Stiffy McStifflesons, to use the expression.
Right, right. Like, no, all right.
They
For real.
Let's be, and I was really, my mind was blown when one of the practitioners said, well, I keep a stack of the registry paperwork right by my desk. And if a patient expresses that they're in any amount of pain, that's where she goes. And here you go.
Yep.
So sometimes it can be just as easy as asking the question. It doesn't necessarily need to be a whole thing.
And like you said, there's such an easy solution for this. If you're in Massachusetts, you go onto the State Department of Health website, and there's literally a directory. And you can click on this person's name, and you can look up their phone, and you can just call them up, and say, hey, this is a physician who...
Well, there are apps.
You also, yes, I mean, there are delivery services where you just send them a picture of your card. Those ones may be less professional. Shout out to Boston's Best Buds. No longer RIP, I should say, to Boston's Best Buds. Hope you're doing all right, Ray. Let's talk a little bit more about kind of what you're doing with patients, right? So people get registered, they're interested in this, and then the next question is, okay, so what are my options? Like, how do I get, what should I be getting? And how do I get it?
There's that whole end of it. And now we're fortunate enough that you don't have to ask the question, all right, now that I'm going to be a patient, am I going to be cultivating this for myself, or am I going to be picking
and that's a good point, because historically it was one or the other.
It was one or the other.
Either grow at home or go to the dispensary. And so if those were your two options, then you go to the dispensary for the most part. And those numbers were way, way out of whack.
Right.
Now the dispensaries can sell clones. So now you can do whatever you want. Within very specific and strict definitions, but there's no either or.
And that's another piece of what Greener Mountain Consulting does. Once somebody is a patient, if they do designate themselves as a cultivator, the state has made the rules they're very onerous to remain in full compliance with. So it's about kind of coaching people and getting the system set up so that they can be and remain compliant.
Compliance is the name of the game, especially as we go into regulation.
I think that's a really good segue to that.
Compliance is going to be, it's huge. I mean, we had our buddy Tim Fair on here, sitting in this very couch.
Shout out to Tim
Not too long ago. Love that guy, Tim Gretchen. Talking about this, and it's like compliance is going to be a huge thing when you're somebody in the professional world, and right now, there are more questions than answers.
Absolutely.
Right? It's kind of like our 45-minute conversation with Tim kind of boiled down to don't violate the letter or the spirit of the law, and kind of don't be an asshole.
Don't be the low-hanging fruit is my advice to everybody. And I know here we are on Instagram. There's going to be a lot of people that are looking to, everybody, we live in a selfie world now. And why wouldn't people, and why shouldn't people be able to take photos of the plants that they're cultivating? You just want to make sure that everything is compliant.
Well, and that's, again, like with your background, and this is why I was really excited to have this conversation, because this is a crystallized transitionary point. And this is part of the role that you are literally playing, is saying, hey, you want to be compliant. Maybe you're somebody like me, somebody who's been out there, who knows a thing or two, has seen this, but you don't want to risk your ass. Like, too old for this shit. I'm not trying to be a cowboy. I'm trying to run a business and do this legitimately.
We're not in our 20s anymore.
Well, right, exactly. And even the vast majority of, the demo numbers for Heady, Vermont, we got a lot of younger people.
Not that anybody in their 20s should be considering any illegal activities.
No, not that long ago. I was in my 20s, despite the hairline. But I think kind of the point is that the kind of quote unquote silent majority. The quote unquote average people who have a regular job, smoke a little on the weekends. They like to garden. They grow plants. They grow tomatoes. Like, they want to get involved in this kind of thing as well. But like you said, how can they do it and stay compliant? So I guess it's a good segue to ask about what things are going to change in July. But I want to back up first and ask about kind of your cultivation services.
Sure.
And sort of what you're providing on that side through Greener Mountain Consulting, because like you said, somebody becomes a patient, and no matter what happens on July 1st, having a medical card is going to be a much stronger legal protection than being a member of the public.
It boils
that's
down to
just
the
fact.
attractiveness of prosecution.
And that's why I think
you're not an attractive prospect if you're a patient.
Yeah, and I don't want to, and the medical program, I don't want to see the medical program die on July 1st. It should get much, much better, right? So there are still a lot of advantages to having a card on July 1st.
There are.
But let's talk about cultivation in the short term, and then maybe kind of how things might change after July 1st. So somebody becomes a patient, they say, all right, I'm a patient. I would like to not spend $800 a month at the dispensary. I don't want to go on Craigslist and
deal with the shady characters.
My buddy's college kid's friend, or something like that.
Absolutely.
They want to grow their own. So what does Greener Mountain Consulting do to kind of help support that?
Well, so it would begin with sort of a discussion. Have they grown anything before? And odds are, if you've successfully grown tomatoes, you will successfully be able to grow cannabis. I think there's a misconception. We call it weed. I think we're going to be seeing this year people trying to grow outdoors after July 1st and put their seeds in the ground. And it's not really how any of this works.
You just throw the seeds out on the ground, and
it makes it happen, and it works.
Yeah.
There's time involved, and July 1st is not the ideal starting point if you're talking outdoors. So
and you're talking about cultivating medical marijuana. You're talking about cultivating something that's produced for a purpose.
Yes.
Right. Specific strains. You want it to be highest yield possible.
Yep. Well, certainly if you're indoor too, there's quality. Efficiency.
Right.
You're dealing with, and that's where the Vermont law, in my mind and my own personal opinion, is lacking. Rather than do a canopy size or do any number of things, they chose to go with a plant count, and that plant count is 2 flowering. Now, the rules say that you're only allowed to have 2 ounces in your possession. We have legalization coming on July 1st. Now, assuming you are not a medical patient, assuming you are a resident and you own the home and you, don't have neighbors near you, and you're allowed, let's say you check all of the marks that will enable you to cultivate outdoors, which is going to be difficult. There's going to be a number of people who won't allow that to happen. So I think the majority of it, we have a very short growing season. It's going to be happening indoors. At that point, we transition to a place where if you're doing it as somebody who's in the rec market, you're allowed to have infinity cannabis in your closet. And you're only supposed to be flowering 2 plants at a time. But the reality is that law enforcement has to be in the building first to find it. So,
well, and this is a huge disconnect with what's happening on July 1st, right? Because the medical program, like you're saying, compliance.
Yep.
Patients have a stricter set of rules than the general public. Which is just like from a basic ethical standpoint, like so morally screwed up and backwards that the people who are, sick and suffering amongst us are the ones who have to go through more than the people who are, fully,
well, and it's even
quote
worse,
unquote healthy.
It's even worse than that. I mean, we do have, in my mind, I don't know if we have any ACLU people out there watching us right now, but there is an issue as far as I'm concerned in terms of discrimination. I'm a patient, and the way the law is set up, that come July 1st, my wife is going to be unable to participate in the home grow because I am currently a cultivator.
Right. And this seems like a very basic civil liberties, civil rights. Like you don't get punished because someone in your household is sick or disabled.
Right.
Or debilitated.
Right.
And this is something to put it directly for people who are watching, and if you're watching this, you have the internet. S216 is the name of the bill. And we know that our friend Fran Janik from Vermont Homegrown is going to be testifying there on Thursday.
Yeah, and this is key to get to.
If you're a patient, you can submit written testimony as well. You can email it to the committee chair. I will go ahead and post that.
I urge and highly encourage any patients in the registry to please, at the very least, submit a written testimony.
Even if it's only a short thing, it doesn't have to be super long. It doesn't have to be incredibly literate. It doesn't have to be your opus. They just need to hear from people.
Yep.
Hear from patients, and we'll share. We're going to be doing some more new grassroots advocacy push on this as well on Thursday.
Awesome.
I'll be down in the State House, but I know Fran's going to be down there, and so if you're a patient, it's a really good time to reach out to your representative and say, hey, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, because I think a lot of people probably are in the legislature just aren't. They did legalization. They're like, all right,
it's over with. It's dealt with. What do you mean?
Yeah.
What do you mean? There's more to talk about? We've already done with this. Yeah.
Oh man, they have no idea what's in store, which is really unfortunate and sad.
Well, and I don't think, honestly, it's also refreshing because I don't think any of us do.
You're right.
We have sort of a blank slate in front of us, and it touches back on the conversation with Tim. Don't be the low-hanging fruit. The people who are looking to get into the industry, I know that's another, you asked, what are some common questions that I get? I mean, there's a variety. Some of them are from patients. Some of them are from young entrepreneurs who want to find their way. And that's something, to me, that Vermont, I've got to be one of the crazy minority that comes to Vermont to open a business. And I want Vermont to be a place that is business friendly, that is to people who are currently invested in the industry here, that they can come out of the shadows and that they can be given a space to operate in. I think this is something that creates jobs. It's something that creates any number of pluses, and I just don't see any downside.
Well, and like you said, I mean, this is kind of a chance for us, no matter all of the other industries that we overregulate, here in Vermont. I say this as someone who wrote in Bernie Sanders. It'd be probably more of this is why these political parties and distinctions are so stupid.
Immaterial.
To just narrow people down to. This is, I think, a chance that people see to take what could be a really great industry for Vermont. I mean, we started this conversation talking about the reputation,
right?
And even in as late as the 90s and 2000s, everybody knew that Vermont was quality.
Yep.
Before the Vermont beer was out there, and it was just people knew that craft, attention to detail, that was a real thing.
Jerry berries.
Jerry. Oh my God, Jerry berries. Give a shout out to Elvis out here. Oh. He's in the building as well.
Awesome.
I guess I'd like to see. We had a couple questions who came in, and I'll invite people who are still watching to go ahead and dump them in. What are you going to be doing on July 1st? I mean, you're going to help people set up greenhouses, set up lights. I mean, talking classes.
Absolutely. I think after July 1st, it really opens it up to everybody. And that's what I'm really excited. I mean, it kind of takes the part where I was working with patients and trying to get patients registered and signed up, and there's a need. I think there's going to be a need for somebody to facilitate somebody getting into this. There's a lot more involved in growing cannabis than people would imagine, especially doing it indoors. And I think that's going to play a bigger part.
And knowing what you want to do and why, right? I mean, that's a big thing. I mean, what do you think about kind of genetics? Are there we know that there are some Vermont strains that are kind of better for outdoor, right? Stuff that flowers super duper early,
super early,
fast,
yep.
Old Early Girl and Northern Lights Heritage, and
absolutely
all that fun stuff. If somebody comes to you and says, "Hey, I'm a random user. I'm not a medical patient.
Yep.
I want to smoke on the weekends or something. Like, help me sleep." Is that the kind of advice you'll be able to provide and say, like, hey, you should maybe consider this kind of strain?
Yeah, absolutely. If it's the advice because there's stuff that's available that's on the market that's now or somebody has started a business, there's a provision for gifting, I guess. That who knows where that's going to go. There's not a provision for it, but the way the law works, I mean, I think we're going to see some creative entrepreneurship.
Yes,
Don't,
creative entrepreneurship.
Don't
I'm going to use
that,
the shit out of that.
Don't,
That's awesome.
You like that?
Yeah, that's really good.
I'll allow it.
Yeah, there is. I mean, and the holes in this law are like big enough to drive.
It's Swiss cheese.
Several. Yeah, as an expert in all things Swiss,
Yeah.
I will agree. It's going to be, frankly, it's going to be kind of scary.
Yeah.
To see who gets their asses nailed to the wall. And sort of why, and that's why I think following the spirit of the law, and like you said, that attention to compliance.
Keeping yourself away from and off of that line.
So I want to ask you a cultivation question, because this is something that people talk about a lot.
Sure.
I kind of see things going in two different ways, right? As it sort of becomes mainstream, more mainstream. Super specific genetic identification. Shout out to Phylos Bioscience. Open
Doing great
source,
work.
3D mapping, all that kind of stuff. So super specific stuff where we know it's not just indica sativa, this is a land race with myrcene and whatever. Or on the other end of the spectrum, we've got like sleepy time. And the people who are getting that, they don't know whether it's, it's kind of like a white labeling thing, and it's kind of like a mainstream thing.
Right.
And like 10 different strains could be sleepy time, or you just let something dry out for an extra few weeks and it becomes a little bit more sleepy time. But like, as somebody who's in this, how do you think that's going to work? And how would you, I guess, like to see it work when it comes to how genetics are going to kind of go mainstream and appreciating like the diversity of the plant versus the need to get people up to speed?
Something that's blown my mind for a long time. Seeds, I don't know if anybody has ever looked into purchasing seeds. They've got a variety. Some are feminized, some are, cannabis plant is male or female. You want to keep the females for the most part.
There's your free Greener Mounder consulting advice for tonight.
I've heard a lot of people say that, like the male plants, that's what hemp is. No, hemp is a completely different issue. Two completely separate things.
Are we going to go super specific and like get the Phylos 3D? Like I love that stuff. I know you do.
I think that we will be seeing a ton of that. What I think is really the most interesting is that we've been now able to get ourselves to a place where we've bred without science, just based on subjective experience. We've been able to breed strains that are touching close to 30% THC. And I don't advise those for anybody who is a beginner to cannabis, somebody who is easing into it, somebody who's a recreational smoker, somebody who wants to enjoy themselves on it. I would advise them to stay away from things that are super high THC.
Low and slow when you're getting into the dro.
You can
what we
low
say.
and slow when you get into the dro.
That's
I
it.
like
well,
that.
we say too when you're eating the dro, especially, but in general, like it seems like the most popular strains right now, from everything I'm reading and seeing and talking to dispensaries and whatnot, it's the 1-to-1s.
Yep.
Give
you that even match.
Yeah, that.
Well, and that's the thing. The CBD will actually cancel out some of the effects of the THC. We have some stuff that's. I was surprised actually. A dispensary in New Hampshire.
That in itself is enough of a surprise. A dispensary in New Hampshire.
Who can imagine that? I was surprised though. They were advertising product that was I think 28% THC and 0.2% CBD. And I scratched my head and I thought to myself, well, geez, that's not necessarily super medicinal. Like, I wonder what the...
Yeah.
And
if it's going to be like beer, right? I mean, like, we've seen this trend with beer.
Yep.
Because I know you're still paying attention to the trends, and I work in beer as well. Like, arms race, right? And it's just like, what can we do to get the... I got to be above 8% to get this double IPA in this can. Yep. Right? And same thing, like, got to be 25% THC.
Or have a cap, like they do in Vermont. I mean, Sam Adams brews a beer that you can't buy in Vermont because we have a cap on what the ABV is that you're allowed to serve for beer. And these are all rules that are yet to be determined.
Right.
You're allowed to grow at your home, but there's no testing,
Right.
And I think that's where Phylos comes in. You want to know, especially if you're growing outdoors, you want to know that what you're growing is going to finish. It's going to be mold resistant. It's going to be we only have a few months to do it.
Right.
I think indoors really is where we're going to be seeing.
Well, and the whole question of value add, right? I mean, these are
Right.
some of the most interesting conversations. We talked about this with Tim here. Come July 1st, you can possess up to 5 grams of concentrates.
Yep.
You cannot use butane or hexane extraction.
Not anymore.
Cannot do that.
Nope. It was fun while it lasted.
For people who knew what they were doing.
For people who knew what they were doing.
And we're doing it safely,
Yep.
100%. And for a lot of other people who got to experience the fruits of their labors,
Yep.
And kind of get introduced to concentrates,
Yep.
And fair amount of sludge too. So some things are not always.
Yeah, kids, don't be open
evolutions.
blasting in your
Yeah.
backyards or in your homes. I mean,
Well, how do you treat the question of concentrates in talking with people? Is that, if you're a medical patient, people who want to make their own edibles, let's say.
Yep.
Or people who
So
want
edibles
to do,
are a tricky sort of a thing.
Right. It really is a science.
It's a science, and it's difficult. You need to know and understand, what we're talking about, the dose response curve. And is somebody cannabis naive, or do they have cannabis tolerance? And even for people who have tolerance, smoking it. I can assure you that eating too much, you can always eat more. You can't really undo the effects once you've eaten too much.
Yes.
And eating too much will be a very uncomfortable experience. And I think that's something that's happened to some people that has shied them away from it. People who
Maureen Dowd, man, she's set back like 10 states,
Yep.
an extra 2 years,
Yep.
with one bad experience in Colorado.
Yep, I was just going to say the trip out to Colorado that,
And you can't make edibles that are dosed correctly unless you know what percentage your strain is.
Right.
Because that's the easy, give you guys some free advice here. If you're making edibles, you know what strain it is.
Yep.
You know how much of it you've used, then it's just a math problem.
Math.
And then all
Simple
you need
math.
to do is divide the number of however many milligrams of THC. If you had 15% bud
Yep.
and you use 10 grams of that, it just becomes a
Cha-ching,
math
cha-ching.
problem and all this stuff.
Yep.
If your bud's not tested, then you can't even calculate
You have no
the
idea.
percentages.
Nope.
And even I think that's one thing we'll see with the concentrates, and even people who are patients and have a high tolerance, right?
Yep.
Like combining smoking and or vaping
Yep.
and or edibles, and even with the edibles, like I've observed this, different kinds of edibles affecting me differently.
Yep.
So like gummies, one certain effect, and then chocolates, kind of another.
Interesting.
So even like that number on the label kind of only goes so far, right?
Right.
And it's sort of changing
if
this
it's 500 milligrams or what
right.
the, yeah.
And it's going from like a 2-dimensional understanding
Yep.
to a more 3-dimensional understanding. Saying like, all right, if I eat, 20 milligrams of gummy, that's a sativa, like going to be great, throughout the day. Whereas if I eat 20 milligrams of chocolate, that is a sativa. Like I know that it's going to give me super heavy lids.
Well, and this
the
is,
sugar is going to, there's
this
all
is
other
the
stuff
issue
too.
for patients too that they deal with. That sometimes, and having run a restaurant, I can tell you it's very difficult to crank out the dish the exact same way every time. Mm-hmm. And that's what, to tie it back to the Swiss thing, that's what the Swiss are very, very good at. It's making sure things are done in a very specific way every time. It's like clockwork. It's like a Swiss watch.
Yeah, literally
like a
clockwork.
Swiss watch. So, yeah.
That's just it's why this stuff is so exciting, and I want to talk about Nican.
Awesome.
Because we have
Beautiful.
been doing this for, you guys who don't know, we've been talking about this for over a
Months.
year. Like, I think it's been at least a year.
More than a year, yeah.
Yeah, since we were talking about
At least
this.
a year, yeah.
Because we were doing Cannabis Week stuff last year.
Right.
Talk about
420.
times
Yeah.
change, man.
Yep.
For at least or probably more than a full year, we've been working closely. Nick with Greener Mountain Consulting, Tim Fair with Vermont Cannabis Solutions, with myself and Monica, and we all decided, Nican is coming to Vermont. We all want to be involved directly. We all want to share the burden. We all want to be involved hands-on.
Let's be hands-on and take this on.
Plug in and use our networks.
Yep.
And try to plug in everybody.
Yep.
And make this a Vermont first, a Vermont
An
forward
all-inclusive
type Yeah. So I'm pumped for NECAN.
It's going to be awesome.
I know you're pumped for NECAN. It's May 12th and May 13th. We have discounted tickets for students, for veterans, and if you are a patient and there is a financial hardship, let us know because we will make sure that
we'll sort it out.
Yeah. Money's not going to be the reason that you can't come to this. It's going to be. We were down at NECAN in Boston.
Yep.
So I thought it would be kind of a cool way to end by give people a little bit of sort of your feedback. They hear me just plugging this, again and again and again.
Yep.
I've showed the video. We have the video. But I kind of want to know what your expectations were and what your takeaways were from Boston and kind of the NECAN show and any other cannabis conventions you've been to and what we want to do in Vermont and what we don't want to do in Vermont or anything. Yeah, we were hanging out in Portland together too.
Right, we had the Portland show. That was a really good time.
Yeah.
But my impression of Boston, it's one of the flagship productions of NECAN, and so the expectation was high, and as an attendee, it far exceeded. I was amazed at the amount and variety of people and players in the industry who were there, who had spent a significant amount of money on tables and there were lawyers, there were people who were doing trimming, there were people who were doing self-contained grow units. It was, and the space was huge.
It really did. You get out of Vermont and you can see that diversity when the scale gets that much bigger.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing that always stands out for me.
There's cognitive dissonance. I didn't really until I walked in and saw, and that was the first thing. Portland was the first show that I had seen, and it was. In Maine, people are very open about smoking. I come from Maine to Vermont.
Yeah, it's awesome.
I guess I missed the boat. Maybe I should have. Sometimes I wonder, maybe should I have stuck around?
I know, man. They're fair. We've lost a lot of good Vermonters to Maine too, man.
And that's really what I'm hoping we can fix.
They're politically what we would like to be. At least you and I think.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah,
I can't speak for everybody.
I'm hoping that come July, we're a place that people are going to want to come to start their business or to enjoy the fruits of the labors, that there's going to be some value add. If you're going skiing, that there's somebody who's...
Well, and it's you just come and see it and the quote-unquote culture, right? Who gets to determine the culture. What I see is that diversity. And that whether it's in Portland or whether it's in Boston or whether it's going to be up there at the DoubleTree, formerly the Sheridan. For everybody who's in
currently
Vermont,
the DoubleTree.
For at least the next few weeks, presumably.
Yes.
Is that you go and you see it's not a scary scene, it's not a sketchy scene,
no,
it's not a dirty scene.
It's a variety.
Man, there's a lot more people in collars than I thought. There's
it cuts across a broad swath.
There's wooks, there's OGs, there's rednecks, and there's farmers. There's college kids and dreadheads and yuppies in suits and all of that kind of together.
Under one roof.
Yeah, which is to me what's exciting, especially about doing this, right now. In 10 years, this shit's going to be a lot more boring than it is right now.
Yeah.
It'll be a lot more, probably suits and not as exciting.
Yeah. No, not as groundbreaking, not as, look, every time we're doing something for the first time, it's the first time.
Yeah.
And kudos to us here in Vermont for being the first state to legalize it through the legislature.
Well, and to keep going out there and doing it. And you said, having the spirit of having some confidence and knowing that what you're doing is not wrong and is not illegal and is not immoral.
Right.
Like we said, kind of that I think is what's going to provide that cultural momentum. The more people doing
and
events,
there'll be a paradigm
businesses,
shift.
Having community events we want to be. I want to be involved in everything because that's just my nature as an only child, and do it all the time. But it's it's a great chance for us to throw it out there to everybody. You're in the Upper Valley.
Yep.
We're pumped that we're going to be down in Brattleboro, at least on June 17th.
Can't get there.
Maybe
from here,
the 16th
sort of
as well.
For me.
True. But
maybe I'll make it out.
It's a good reminder for everybody else that's out there too. We'd love to work with you. Heady Vermont, we will co-sponsor, we will co-promote, we will.
They're easy people to work with.
In-kind partners, yeah, exactly. And Nick is as well, and so it's a cool opportunity for us to sort of remind people that
nice.
We're all out here. It's true, man. It's sincere. I've had a good time.
Awesome.
It's we're all going through this kind of together and seeing sort of the fluctuations, and even within our own little, Vermont sort of cannabis community,
own bubble, yeah.
And seeing how everybody works together and doesn't, and who.
Will everybody play nice, and how do we get
Yeah.
everybody? And I think fortunately we're in a place right now where in the industry here in Vermont, amongst the established players, where for the most part, I think we're at a relative calm. And I don't think it's calm before the storm. I think that it's calm that has come from a place of previous. The storm, I think, has passed.
Yeah.
I think we're now all, for the most part, on the same page.
Ooh, well, we'll see next year when those license. You guys will
once
see.
we start handing license out, then there's going to be another.
We'll see in the fall when there are X amount of licenses, and it's time to figure out who gets them where.
Yeah,
and why.
If that's where it goes.
Yeah, it's going to be, that doesn't mean that it's going to be bad within the community, but the dynamics are going to change quite a bit.
And I want to tie that back into Fran, because Fran is at Vermont Home Grow, is very tapped into what's going on at the state level. And I think that everybody, if you drop that link in there about the testimonial, write the testimony. If you can't show up, Montpelier, there are a lot of places in Vermont where you can't get there from here. Montpelier, it seems like all roads lead to Montpelier.
It's pretty. They made it the capital for a reason. That was literally the reason why they moved it from Windsor.
Pack that room.
I
think that's going to be something really important. I think it's something that they're not necessarily expecting. I don't think this is something that we want to have brushed off and pushed to the side. It's something that deserves attention. And if you have the time, please at least write in, and if you can, show up to show your support.
I want to thank you again for joining us, Nick.
Pleasure being here.
I want to, as always, thank the man behind the scenes, Shawn Cimonetti, always ready.
Shawn killed it.
This dude's still in college. Unbelievable.
I believe it. He looks young.
His Gmail is on here. You can contact Shawn. I can't guarantee you're going to have the same amazing set provided by Jam Creative.
He's got...
Shout out to our set designer, Colin Garvey.
Great work with the firm.
Dropping in here tonight, absolutely. Jam Creative, thank you for hosting us. Shawn Cimonetti behind the decks. If you have more questions that we did not answer, I see Kevin's on here. Drop the questions in.
Kevin Driscoll?
We're going to hang out. No.
I was going to say hi to him.
Different Kevin. Always say hi.
Always say hi to everybody. Say goodbye to everybody.
Out there. Big shout out to our friend Ben Dabin. You want to talk about First? There may or may not have been a dab bar.
I might or might not
Saturday,
have
there
heard
may or
about
may not
this.
have been I have never seen a menu in the state of Vermont before.
It might or might not have been on a whiteboard
It's,
from what I might or not have heard.
Yeah, man. The future is bright. It's going to be interesting stuff. So we encourage you guys, stay tuned, stay involved. Drop your questions in here. If you are in the Upper Valley, if you are a patient, if you are somebody who is cultivating, if you're somebody who may be cultivating, you can go online, you can get the resources, but it's always best to get the info in person from a real person who knows what he's talking about. Nick will travel. He came all the way up here tonight to hang out with us in Burlington. So check out Greener Mountain Consulting, and more importantly, come hang out and see us all at NECAN.
Yeah.
We're all going to be there running around like a bunch of
it's gonna be
chickens
an
with our heads
awesome
cut
event.
off, but we're going to have some fun, and we're also going to get to talk a lot of business. So Greener Mountain Consulting, Facebook, internet. You guys can find Nick on there.
Email me, Nick at greenermountainconsulting.com. If you guys have questions, whatever you guys want to do, I'm pretty easily reachable. You guys get in touch anytime with any questions.
We love it. Just barely scratching the surface. All right. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in.
Have a good night.
Cheers and thank you to Shawn as well.
Shawn, great work.
See you all soon.
Peace.